Welcome everybody to our event, My Life, My Business Wish Hours here. And we have discussions around living your life in a manner that's at a level that is engaged and therefore ultimately joyful. So we've had several topics over the weeks that we skipped last week. So Shanaz is going to be chatting to us today, and just to talk a little bit about how we can renew our engagement. I have no idea what she's going to bring, but I am so curious. So Shanaz, mighty welcome to you, and yeah, I'm all ears. Over to you.
Thank you, Jacques. And I was remembering that the last one discussion that we had 2 weeks ago, you were talking about courage and forming that habit. But I think that there was some of the things that caught me was about the courage and to be bold and to kind of do those steps and go out and achieve your dreams, and we've been looking at how to achieve those dreams. And a lot of the focus has been, which has been really helpful, has been on um, go and be bold and achieve those dreams, but also break them up into little chunks. So that they're more realistic, so that you don't feel overwhelmed. And I think you spoke about the author Swoboda, and she actually mentions one of those um, phrases that I like: feel the fear and do it anyway. So it was also about the fear. And I think that I identified with, you mentioned the three kinds of characters: the saboteur, the perfectionist, and yeah, how we can, in other words, we can slow ourselves down with our own, we can sabotage ourselves basically. And I, of course, felt that there are times that I think I fall into the perfectionist and then the saboteur. But anyway, and I thought, um, I was thinking about why do I fall into those traps. And then I feel overwhelmed. And often, what I experience is often a lot of what my students experience. And it's also what a lot of the clients that I engage with, or the teams that I work with in my field, experience. And we avoid difficult conversations that we need to have. And I may have touched on it briefly, maybe last year, and because we spoke about courage, I remembered that one of my values that I think about, and when I am doing work, then I like to tell people that I believe in courageous conversations, and that means that I will be deeply compassionate with you, but I will also challenge you. And where courageous. Today I'm going to be speaking about courageous conversations, and so interestingly, where courageous conversations, and it's even a brand, come from, is a guy called Glenn Singleton, and he's from the States. And he was in, I think he was a high school teacher, if I'm correct. And America has been experiencing many racial tensions, from due to the series of black young men that have died at the hands of police. And this became very topical. And what he discovered was that people, in particularly in the States, but he is gone, and it's broadened the brand and what he does. He then decided to start this company and training on how to have courageous conversations. And his conversations was mainly about race, that uncomfortable feeling that people don't really want to talk about race. But what, because of the success of what he did and how he did it, it's kind of broadened out that others sort of have taken it on beyond race. And so today I want to kind of focus on um, what how to have those courageous conversations, because I realize that if we are going to achieve our dreams or meet our goals or even develop a habit, an important habit that will change us. And if we are going to change as individuals, if that is what you want, if you want your team to change, if you sometimes just, if you need to change, then we are not going to be able to do this without having a courageous conversation, either with yourself, but often with others that we engage with. So, what are courageous conversations? So what they kind of those who've kind of brewed it, I've got this from a business blog, and what they talk about, what is courageous conversations, and it's based on the idea of Glenn Singleton's idea that courageous conversations are then intentionally involve giving space to complex issues of social justice, race, and privilege. But I take it beyond with my patients that I sometimes work with. I take it to those complex problems in families or in work situations that we are unable to deal with. So these are and why they call it courageous is that it requires us to be bold, to be honest in sharing our experiences, but also to hearing the experience of others. So this week, and I'll give you an example, over the past few weeks in church, we've been having courageous conversations with ourselves and each other within our cell groups around finances. And and it for some people it meant that they needed to go and have a conversation with their husband or their children about finances and the state of their finances. So a courageous conversation then is that conversation that we generally tiptoe around, that we want to avoid, but we need to have it in order to achieve what we need to achieve. And what they say is that having these difficult conversations means being open to having our viewpoints challenged, as well as directly confronting topics that many of us have been taught that you don't discuss this in a polite conversation. But these conversations are really important. And why is it important to have a courageous conversation? Because, as I said, if you're going to try and change or form a new habit, it does mean, I guess, it can go hand in hand with needing to change something in a relationship. It can mean having to work differently with the finances. It could also mean going to ask your boss for an increase. It could also mean having to speak to a colleague who you are struggling to get along with in a project. And because sometimes these courageous conversations, when we are sidestepping it and avoiding it, they actually then lead to us either procrastinating what we need to do in our lives, and can eventually lead to sabotaging our goals and careers. um, and I'm thinking not only about the difficult conversation of finances, but the difficult conversation that could have happened in a team last year. So on Thursday I'm having a consultation with an organization and a team, and they were totally demoralized by an audit that was done by a government organization or the government department with them last year. And I've been speaking to the manager on a regular basis, and this team feels like they can't really do their job properly. They are feeling really low, and morale is low. And so it's about acknowledging, for them, I'm going to have a courageous conversation with them in acknowledging how they actually feel. And so, courageous conversations means talking about what is actually in the room. And when I mention what is actually in the room, it could be feelings of fear. There could be feelings of, am I going to lose in this case? Does it mean that the organization is going to close if we continually perform badly? Or does it mean that I need to have a change of job? So it could also be frustration or anger and resentment. And so a courageous conversation means that whether you are an individual who's going to speak to, say, your husband or your partner or someone in business, a colleague, it means that you're going to have to be open to possibly hearing some things you're not comfortable in hearing. But the important thing is to have the conversation, because what this conversation can actually bring about is it can really bring about change in the relationship. It can really bring about change in the atmosphere. And it can really assist you. And that person may be able to, when you're really listening to what they're saying, or they are really listening to you when you're having this challenging conversation, it can strategically change the direction of your relationship, can strategically change yourself. I mean, it can put you on the path of achieving your goals. And in the meantime, we've been trying to avoid it. And it was really amazing in our church cell group to hear how many people do not want to engage with their families or their husbands or their partners about the finances. And so, it can be something as easy, or not as easy. It can be something as a budget, but it can also be something as complex that I'm going to be working with a team that needs to possibly acknowledge where they have contributed to the poor result. And even though this team has done what they needed to do, and there's lots of circumstances, particularly around not having the resources to do the tasks that they were required to do, in order to actually move them, we do need to have this conversation about what they perhaps contributed, how they contributed to this current situation, but also acknowledge where they are at. So, and I said that what courageous conversations also help us do, it also help us to really understand the problem that we are dealing with. Because often, if we don't have that honest conversation, or if I want a raise or an increase from my boss, he may actually decide to give me advice as to how I can do it. And so, if I'm too nervous or too worried to have that bold conversation with him, I'm never going to know how easy or not easy, or the steps that I'm going to require to have that increase. And for the team that I'm going to be working with, if we don't have this conversation, then they may struggle to complete their daily tasks, and may possibly continue to underperform, and not really meet the goals of the organization. And I think that this is kind of really important to have that kind of difficult conversation. And so what it's called, this blog that I'm kind of discussing and using my own experience with, also is called Better Up, and they look at courageous conversations. And what they talk about is that what you need to do when you have this courageous conversation, you need to stay engaged. And what that means is, when we are hearing uncomfortable things being said to us, or the topic is uncomfortable, then it can mean that a typical defense mechanism, we want to shut down, or we want to walk away, or we want to not really hear. So a courageous conversation also means that we have to, what I call, deep listening deeply. and being willing to stay maybe and experience that discomfort. And what they say, in a courageous, in when you're having this difficult conversation, or if someone is even having this difficult conversation with you, you don't have to be responding to them. Sometimes participating in this and staying present. And I think that that's sometimes the important part, or maybe what I find is the challenging part. Even when I'm having a difficult conversation with a family member, I get, I can get, let's say, I get defensive myself, and I get angry, and so I need to kind of prepare for that conversation. And they kind of actually give they kind of give little advice or guidelines to kind of how you kind of go about it. And this kind of thing is the idea that to set aside some time, whether it's in your workplace, to talk about the things that is in the atmosphere but you don't acknowledge. And I spoke about that, acknowledging what is in the room. And for some organizations, it can be about race, privilege. It can be about social justice issues like gender, even. But the important thing is to actually set aside and tell your staff or tell your team or make an appointment with the person, and kind of so that they are aware that you want to do it. So set aside time for it is really important, because often we find, because we're avoiding these conversations, we're not actually setting a time, and we think that they're going to happen spontaneously. The issue is that it can happen spontaneously, but we may not always be prepared for it when it happens spontaneously, and it can kind of um, it implode on itself if we don't prepare. So I always suggest that you kind of prepare yourself to go into this conversation. And what they also suggest is to speak your truth. So he says that they say that we are experts in defining our own experiences and personal realities, and it's healing to have a space where you can show up and be fully authentically yourself. And I think that workspaces, we spend so much time at work, and some of us spend time after hours at work. That is a space that you really do need to be able to show up and be fully yourself. And it's really, you struggle when you aren't able to show up for yourself or be authentically yourself and bring your full self into the workspace. And I think that it's important that we can do that. The other thing that they say is that expect that the issues are not going to be addressed immediately. So I've had difficult conversations with a family member, and I had to admit that I expected it to be resolved. But what I kind of see is that it's an ongoing conversation. It's not going to um, it's not going to magically disappear or take care of itself. And what they also then say is that for an organization, so the organization that I'm going to, what I'm preparing myself is to listen to the workers who've been through a really tough time, but also kind of help them see that it's in the small changes that makes a difference to their work. So we're not going to be able to change the policy maybe immediately, or their circumstances. But if we can just change how they relate to each other and how they understand their goal, then, and we can learn from each other, then it's those small changes that can actually make their working environment a much better place. But I think that what has happened is that they haven't had the space where they were able to talk about how they really felt about the audit that they had been through with the government department. And this happened last year, and that's still sort of, in a sense, festering in the background. And so there is a need, but also to acknowledge that it's not going to change overnight. um, I think that the other part about having a courageous conversation is really to listen. And I think we've mentioned it several times. I think here we talk about sometimes we listen, but we're listening to respond. We have the answer ready. And when we kind of engage in a conversation where we know it's a difficult topic or it's a complex situation, that we really listen, and that we also realize that maybe the person isn't really trying to change our mind, but that we can be open to hearing the experiences of another person. We don't have to change our beliefs drastically or change our stance, but we can hear what the experience of the other person has been. And I think that that is one of the central goals of having a courageous conversation. Can I really listen to my husband, my brother, a partner, a colleague, and really understand their experience and where they're coming from? Can I put aside my defensiveness so that I can just hear that? Because when I just hear that experience, it may not change my mind, but it may change my attitude to the problem or the situation that I experience. Along with that is to suspend our judgment. So when we go into a courageous conversation, is to suspend our judgment about that person and the behavior or about the situation. So, with a family member that I was going into this courageous conversation, I had a lot of judgments about them, and it was it was about my youngest sibling, and I felt that he was unable to take responsibility. And the first conversation that I tried to, because I had this that he cannot manage money, he cannot take responsibility, with the first conversation I had with him was disastrous because I responded with that and he responded defensively. And I realized that the second conversation that we had was much better because I decided to go in there not judging him, and I didn't become defensive, and I didn't accuse him of being irresponsible. So I think that that is kind of part of where we're going, is to suspend a judgment. And I think, sort of finally, that we do want to get to that place where we actually just want to hear what that person experience is. And for me, then, kind of going into this conversation is to model the kind of behavior. If you are going to start and initiate a courageous conversation, you are, as a coach, as a lecturer, and often I find myself in those positions as a lecturer. I have 400 students in my one class from diverse backgrounds, and I've got to address issues of gender and race, and I've got to model that I'm open to hearing their experience, even though it may be different. And so I need to model acceptance and being non judgmental so that I can make them feel, and my students feel, that they are part of this class, that they belong, and that they can bring their full authentic selves with. And once we've had that conversation and I've engaged in it, I can tell you most times the situation is very different for me afterward. And so I really want to encourage everyone to have that courageous conversation with your boss, with your colleague, with your wife, with your husband, with a family member, even in church. And you will be amazed to see the difference that it can make to the situation you may find yourself in. Thank you.
There's so much, that you've shared. So I'd start with Just a comment on the recent thing. One of the last things that you've been saying. Um, uh, in the presence of fear, and in your lead on into this topic, you just reflected back on the aspect that we discussed previously is um, feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And I guess this is where, if you just break it up, is despite misgiving, despite all the kinds of things that we worried about, um, whether we touch on a difficult conversation, I guess the fear is that the outcome will be negative, whatever picture we associate with that sort of negativity. However, I was just thinking, Shanaz, um, that once and you've planned it, you're intentional, and I think that's the whole point. Is don't wait for the right moment to do it, and in that spontaneous moment, it might not even happen, because if you're intentional, you can prepare um, the moment when you're going to do it, and then make sure you do it as planned. And I was thinking, so what happens when you do this planning? So I'm all into this kind of thing, but is we worried sometimes just about the confrontation that this courageous conversation might turn into, and in fact, what you're saying is um, modeling the right kind of behavior when you are going to talk to somebody, or whatever that might be. Is And the two things that stand out for me is that acceptance and being non-judgmental. So, and then being prepared. Part of the preparation is being prepared to listen, to understand you have an issue, but it's only an issue from your point of view. Even asking for a raise, you have an issue. You might not know why it is that a raise might not be um, forthcoming, or it could be that when you ask for that raise in the manner that you do it in, etc., actually gets the desired response. So being intentional, being prepared to listen, and expect the best outcome. I think that's probably one of the things that will trigger me, expecting the best outcome. So it's therefore with that kind of focus to say, well, why am I having this conversation? And answering that question, and Shanaz, you spoke about, is you got to kind of temper your expectation. Have a reasonable expectation. It may require multiple conversations, multiple interactions. In fact, when you break the ice initially and you raise it, all the rest of the conversations, I gather, will become much easier. So in the preparation phase is to think about, what is it that I want from this conversation? Not worried about or anxious about what might go wrong if I'm having this conversation. Reframe it into, okay, this is what I'm hoping to achieve, or this is the response I'm focusing on. So yes, that is just the practical things that trigger within me when I listen to what you've been saying. And the other thing is you spoke about being bold and honest and so on. And I think a courageous conversation, you can practice it on yourself. Have the courage to address what is going on in yourself, because sometimes we assume that where we are at is that we're doing all the right things, we are kind of perfect, etc., etc. So the situation that we need to address lies elsewhere, and I then think probably something, as I'm thinking about it, is when you add humility to having a courageous conversation, I think you can only have success. So thank you, Shanaz. That was just awesome.
Thank you, Jacques. And just to kind of end, I think that humility is so important. I agree with you, and because even if you're right, just as an example, so someone that I'm working with, the social justice issues are very evocative and provocative, and so he would like to kind of go and change all the senior managers and directors and all the counselors, but he's got such a passion for it, but it's the way in which he's going about it, and so part of my discussion with him is around kind of having that, being able to listen to the other person and also hearing their side of it, even though he's right, and even though it's connected with human rights issues. But if he's going to be aggressive and decide that he's going to turn this into a fight each then people do shut down eventually, and they'll not take the issues that he's bringing up very seriously, and they are. So they almost. So I almost want to say the thing that you are bringing is really important. So so engage with it as if it's really important, and then it's amazing what will happen. It deserves your attention and focus, and and the courage that you're going to have. So
Absolutely. And I
yeah.
mean, so many different aspects. So I just, my last comment is going to be something that you're saying, willing to stay and experience the discomfort. When you find yourself, sometimes you are being in an engagement that requires your response on the spot. Sometimes you now need to say something because this is your moment. I can just encourage everyone listening to this is, when you in that flow, stay in the flow, as Shanaz is saying, embrace the discomfort. And while you are listening so actively, you are then able to understand where the other person has come. And so, listen, it is so important to listen. Listening to understand. I see why you are saying what you are saying. It could be completely a misconception, misperception. But once you understand, you can address the matter, and not in a confrontational manner, but in a compassionate way. So I think, certainly, practice courageous conversations, in every single aspect of your life, in your career or in your business. Sometimes you have to deliver some news that will not be received so well. Well, do it in a way that somebody accepts it with grace and gratitude. So, Shanaz, I gather that since we're heading into the Easter weekend, we're only going to be chatting the next 2 weeks, eh?
Yep. Yes.
But just thank you for this topic, and I probably think it's going to be a constant reminder, to come back to this, where we are not held back by expectations of doom and gloom, but we cross that barrier willingly and with courage, so that we can achieve our goals.
Yes. Thank you. That's well said. Thanks, Jacques.
All right, you have a fantastic 2 week. Have a blessed Easter weekend. So we'll chat in 2 weeks.
Yep. Thank you so much. You too. Bye. Bye.
Bye.